Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Rock'em Sock'em Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. This is the true story of the time I saw an actual fight between a man and a dog man. Get comfortable. I'm going to go back to the beginning now. When I was a kid in the 1970s, my parents separated, and for about a year and a half, I lived with my uncle, who I'll call Uncle Popeye for this story. He had lost one of his eyes in Vietnam, and he had a gravelly voice, but he was a former Army guy, not a sailor like the original Popeye. He had also been a boxer when he was in the service before he lost his eye. Apparently won more than he lost. I'm not sure what he supported us on, but he didn't work and never seemed short of funds. He lived very humbly in a tiny house near the Allegheny National Forest, but we ate well, and he took care of all of my needs and wants. My favorite game back then was called Rock'em Sock'em Robots. They have made sporadic comebacks now and then since the 70s. I don't know if they exist currently. It was a plastic version of a video game. You had two plastic robots in a plastic boxing ring with plastic handles on either side that you'd grip with your hands. On top of the handles were buttons you'd jam with your thumbs, which would throw either left or right punches depending which button you pushed. If you got your punch at just the right spot on the other robot's chin, his head would ride up into the air on metal gears that made a quacking sound. Your opponent would issue the traditional admission.
Oh, my block is knocked off.
That meant you won. I got my uncle to play Rock'em Sock'em Robots with me every single night, and he'd tell me stories about real-life boxing matches he'd been in, and dirty tricks that had been played on him and others in the business. He'd also give me tips on how to score more knockouts and how to be a better Rock'em Sock'em robot in general. On weekends, we'd nearly always go fishing and sometimes hunting. I was less squeamish about gutting a fish than skinning a rabbit, so I far preferred fishing to hunting. Fish seemed almost like they were put there to be eaten, but land animals all felt to me like beings with souls, and I was upset about the idea of hunting them, even though we were doing it for food and not for sport. I was obedient to my uncle, so I hunted when he wanted us to, but he understood that this was not for me. I studied fishing, though, both to get better at it and also to encourage my uncle to hunt less and fish more. Back then, one time I caught a steelhead in Lake Erie that weighed almost 16 pounds. Not a record or anything, but a good haul for a kid my age. There was one weekend that Uncle Popeye decided we were just going to hike and camp and not kill anything at all. This seemed strange for him. He liked for his leisure time to be productive, but there were some areas in the national forest nearby he loved that he wanted to show me, so we made a day of it out there, seeing some of my uncle's favorite natural areas. That night, I woke up needing to relieve myself. I prepared to leave the tent I was sharing with my uncle when I heard something or someone moving outside. It might have been a deer, but it might have been a serial killer also, and my uncle had already set down the protocol for such an occasion. I was to wake him up and let him decide what would happen next. So I roused my uncle and explained the situation to him quietly. He put his forefinger to his lips, telling me to be quiet. Then we both listened. Nothing. Maybe what I heard had left, or maybe it was just being quiet, hoping to lure us out of our tent. My uncle, not having heard the movement earlier, decided I had imagined it. I knew I had not. He decided we should walk out to the woods so I could relieve myself and he would stand guard. I told him I didn't really need to go anymore. He ignored my whining and left the tent. I ran after him. We walked from the dark clearing into the darker woods. I couldn't see anything, and neither of us wanted to use our flashlights in case there really was someone or something wandering around here. We were attempting a ninja-style bathroom trip here. The only trouble was I was absolutely terrified. I could hear crickets, frogs, birds that were maybe owls, branches, leaves, and so many other noises that I couldn't name all at once. In my utter, complete fear, my senses were wide open and receiving far more information than usual. I couldn't believe how alive the forest is at night. And I couldn't believe I had never noticed that before. Sometimes when you're literally afraid for your life, every single moment becomes remarkably interesting and wonderful. When you know you might lose something, you start to recognize its value. All I had to do was finish my duty and get back in our tent, and everything would be fine. And that's what I would have done if I hadn't been so frightened that I was shaking all over. My uncle told me to hurry up. I explained to him that telling me to hurry up was making it take longer. He thought about that for a while, then suggested I imagine the sound of water running. That's when I heard running, but not water. I heard a man running toward us. Must have been a big man, because each time he landed I felt the ground shake through my feet, and each time I felt it a little harder, which meant he was running toward us. I bolted toward the tent, pulling my various wardrobe malfunctions back into place as I ran. I was crying, and I remember saying, "Oh no," or something along those lines. This was a worst-case scenario about to play itself out. Some large man was about to attack us in the pitch darkness. I dove into the tent and fished around for my flashlight. I found my uncle's first and spun around on my knees, shining the light out in the direction I had come from. I wanted to at least understand who was attacking us. What I saw made me drop the flashlight. I only saw it for a second, and it must have taken me 15 or 20 seconds to recover from what I had seen, but it'll take me a minute to describe it. My Uncle Popeye was standing there with his shirt torn, bloody scratches on his muscular arms and chest, and he was squared off in a boxing pose against a man who was even larger than the largest man I had imagined when I was listening to those footfalls running toward us. This thing had to have stood 13 feet tall if it stood an inch, and while my uncle had his hands in fists, this man held his out over his head, long fingernails faced out, as though he planned to slash at my uncle, not punch him. The tall man had nails like talons, like claws. He was the hairiest man I'd ever seen, but not furry like a cat or dog or bear. He had very dense hair, but not fur. There were patches where you could see the pink flesh underneath the hair, and there were areas in which the skin was entirely covered. It was much thicker than your average hairy man, but if a bear looked like that, I would think it must have mange. The man had a hairy head with a beard that came up around his nose and right under his eyes, nearly covering his entire face. The end of his dark pink nose was not covered by hair and seemed sort of like a pig or dog nose in that the nostrils faced directly out. The strangest thing of all was that in the split second I shone my life, I could swear that the creature had two large, long horns on its head, like the devil. This is what eventually woke me from my shock. Had I seen the devil fighting my uncle? I grabbed the flashlight and held it back on the two figures in the darkness. Those were not horns on the huge man's head. They were something even stranger. They were dog ears. Was this a mangy dog? Was this a very large, sick dog running around on its hind legs in the dark out of some sort of manic state? Had it been driven into a frenzy by something? My uncle took a few punches at the creature's body, landing each blow with ease, but not seeming to have much of an impact on the giant dog-headed monster itself. Then, Uncle Popeye landed a true rock'em sock'em blast right on this hideous forest demon's chin, and actually set him back a step. Then the annoyed monster screamed. The dogman gave my uncle a backhanded slap in a bored manner and sent him flying sideways into a tree. I watched as my only means of support crumpled like Raggedy Andy, and the dogman wandered off aimlessly into the forest. I guess he forgot about me, which was just as well. It was a while before I could get up the courage to go out and see my uncle. It didn't take much to wake him up, and he was able to walk back to the tent under his own power. We spent the rest of the night in silence. By the morning, my uncle decided we were leaving. He seemed okay, although we really should have gone to the hospital to have him checked out for all manner of things, including a concussion, internal bleeding, and possible infection of all those cuts. But he was Uncle Popeye, and it was the 1970s, so we went home and moved on. One of the big changes in our life that arose out of this occurrence was that my uncle enrolled me in karate classes. He said the reason the dogman slapped him around was that he was trying to box the creature. If he had been familiar with Eastern fighting techniques, which are more useful against a larger opponent, he might have held his own longer or not gotten hit as hard. He wanted me to know how to fight larger guys than myself, and it was the dogman who inspired him to enroll me in those classes. I got sick of rock'em sock'em robots after that. My new thing was the Kung Fu TV show, starring David Carradine. Although, I don't think even David Carradine could have won a fair fight against the Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The Dogman of Van Cortlandt Park. When I was much younger, about 5 or 10 years ago, I used to date a girl that lived behind Van Cortlandt Park. One night after walking her home, I saw a dogman in the forest behind her house. This was long before I'd ever heard of such a thing as a dogman, and so I did something very foolish that nearly cost me my life. Let me go back to the beginning. I don't need to tell you much about the girl I was dating, but when I met her in the city, I had her pegged for a Manhattan girl or Brooklyn possibly. We made casual friends right away, and the second time we ran into each other in a club, we got much closer. I wasn't just attracted to her, I was falling for her quickly, and before you knew it, I had a girlfriend that had to ride trains for 90 minutes to get home. That meant a lot of alone time in public for us, but it also meant incredibly tedious 90-minute rides back to civilization for me after the dates were over. I liked her a lot, but I don't like the suburbs, and technically I think this girl was officially 1 block into Yonkers, for crying out loud. I kinda made up my mind to give it a chance until the fall, then if we were still together, decide what to do then. I sort of enjoyed being alone walking back to the train on summer evenings, but I knew I was going to really begin to dislike all the traveling once the weather got colder again. Maybe we'd get serious by then and she could move in with me in the city, or maybe we might want to move on from each other before the winter. So, to walk her home from the train, we'd have to walk a few blocks along the back of Van Cortlandt Park, which is a huge natural area that also includes a golf course and I forget what else. I think there's a cemetery there too, if I'm remembering correctly. So anyway, we'd walk down this long street for 4 or 5 blocks with the houses on the right side of the street that people lived in, and on the left side of the street was just jungle basically, forest, straight up to the edge of the tar with a little 1-foot tall metal fence marking the border between. I remember asking her if animals ever came across the road into people's yards, and she said yeah. Sometimes you'd see a squashed possum or a squirrel on the road. There were a few points where the trees had branches long enough that the squirrels could leap across the highway from one branch to another and make it across safely. Most of the time. I used to kid her when we were walking there on dark nights that the forest clearly held Sasquatch. I think I would tell her that it was very squatchy and try to get her scared. It never worked, but on those long walks back alone, I was certain I heard Bigfoot, serial killers, probably even Freddy Krueger back in that forest. It always sounded like someone was tailing me. In fact, it sounded so much that way every single time that I figured it had to be an echo or something like that. But when I would walk toward her house, the sound was definitely not there. I figured maybe it had to do with me being alone, that the echo might get canceled out if there were other sounds like talking. Still, my walks back got a little faster each time, as I could just not be certain of what I was hearing. Okay, so fast forward to me agreeing to go to a party up in her hood that doesn't start till late. That meant I'd have to be doing the perp walk back to the train at dawn, but whatever. Summer party, meet new people, all that. So, on this occasion, I had to meet her at her door, actually meet her parents. Then they would drive us over to the party. I ended up getting along with her father well enough that he suggested we walk to the place alone. It's just 7 or 8 blocks, and it's such a nice night, he told us, and so, with her parents' blessing, off we went into the night. So we walked, and even though we were making chit-chat, I could hear that echo, which never really sounded at all like an echo. It sounded like something was walking through the brush alongside where we were walking. It would stop when we would stop, and it would go when we would go. The girl noticed the sounds and noticed me noticing them. This got her nervous. "Listen," she said to me seriously, "if that turns out to be like son of Sam Jr. or something in those woods, you've got to carry me." I was like, "What does that mean?" And she was like, "You need to pick me up and carry me because you know I can't run in these heels." It was true, she couldn't. Her parents wouldn't let her go out in a miniskirt, and they ended up agreeing on this pencil skirt thing that went down below her knees, and she ended up wiggling more than walking. How her dad saw that as less sexy, I'm not sure, but the louder that noise got in the woods, the more I wish that girl was wearing roller skates instead of heels. I heard branches breaking at heights much higher than mine, so I got the sense of it being very tall. Consequently, I stopped thinking this was a human stalker at all, and I relaxed a bit. I was thinking it might be a deer or a moose or something like that. I was from Manhattan. I didn't know that moose aren't supposed to run through Yonkers, so this made sense to me. Then, whatever it was, came out of the woods, and you know what? Just like moose, these things aren't supposed to be in Yonkers either. Picture a tricked dog that walks on its back legs on a TV show, right? Now imagine this dog is like twice your size and half crazy from hunger. Dogs are cute when we're 5 times bigger than they are, but what about when the tables are turned? This dog looked like it would take a lot of Alpo to stop his stomach from rumbling. It took a step forward, and in that one step it was nearly already at the painted yellow lines in the middle of the road. I noticed when it took that step how sure-footed this creature was. We were not watching a stupid pet trick. We were watching a graceful, giant predator working its craft. The craft of hunting humans. "Call your father," I suggested strongly. She began fiddling with her phone nervously. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. Just then, a loud beeping scared me, and apparently the Dogman too, as it fled off in the forest somewhere. A car screeched to a halt, and the driver got half out of his front door, leaning up over his car hood and asking if we were okay. I said we were thanks to him, asked if he could stick around for a minute, while my date called her father to have him come pick us up. He said sure, and she made her call. Then he sort of made comments to the effect that he had places to go. I reminded him of the giant dog-headed thing in the woods that he had just stopped to save us from, and for some reason that only seemed to make him even more eager to leave. Then we all heard it. A growling from the forest. Our rescuer fled the scene like in an old Keystone Cops black and white comedy. Now there was nothing between us and that Dogman except some leaves, branches, and 2 lanes of blacktop. "Let's move," I said. "Carry me," she said. I grabbed her right hand with my left and pulled her away from there. She squealed and did her best to keep up as I heard the thing emerging from the trees. I knew it was on the road now. I knew it was coming toward us. I could hear it breathing. I could smell it now. It smelled like the entire zoo was walking toward us. I suppose, in a sense, that was true. Funny the weird things you think of as you're about to die. I could hear the creature just a few feet behind me, and I figured it was time for me to face my fate. Maybe I could keep him from getting the girl if nothing else. I turned, ready to fight for my life, and instantly realized how ridiculous the notion was. This was taller than a tall man, and it had claws like nothing I had ever seen. I guess they were claws like a bear, but they were shaped more like human hands. It had teeth like an alligator, I guess you could say. It did not look like it led a vegan lifestyle. It took a step forward, and I literally had to look up to continue to watch this proto-cave dog monster face drooling at me. Suddenly, the dogman was illuminated from its right, and a car was speeding directly toward us. I backed up, and so did the creature, and my girlfriend's father skidded and screeched into the picture. He shouted at us to get in, and we sped off. I didn't see the creature reemerge from the woods as we left the scene. He claimed he hadn't seen anything, but he seemed as upset as we were, so I didn't really believe him. We didn't stay long at the party, as we were both concerned with getting rides home. I wasn't ever interested in walking that girl home again alone. When I would visit her from then on, we would cab it. And since that ate into my vast fortunes, I gradually dated her less and less as we headed into the autumn months. We never had a big fight or a breakup. We had gone through a traumatic event together, and it had changed us. Sometimes that makes two people bond together more strongly, and other times it changes them each in different ways so that they just naturally move on. And that is the true story of how I saw the Dogman of Van Cortlandt Park. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.